There is an internal schedule that is not printed in any calendar. It operates on a rhythm that defies the clocks we live by, ignores the deadlines we chase, and pays no attention to the timelines society has laid out for us. For decades, it runs silently in the background. Then, somewhere around the age of 60, it sounds a quiet alarm. And from that day forward, nothing is ever quite the same. On the surface, everything might appear normal. You still have your routines, your relationships, your responsibilities. But inwardly, a fundamental compass begins to turn. Your inner true north is recalibrating. This isn't a dramatic earthquake, it's a slow, deep, tectonic shift. It feels as if a part of you, a very old part, has simply lost interest in the game. The exhausting race to keep up, the desperate need for approval, the ambition that once burned like a fuel. It all starts to feel like a distant echo. The soul begins a pilgrimage, not backward into regret, but inward toward a forgotten center. It's a quest for artifacts left behind in the rush of life, a fragment of a dream buried under duty, a spark of intuition ignored for the sake of logic, a quiet truth you were once too afraid to speak. Carl Jung described the arc of life in two parts. The first half dedicated to building a functional self, an ego that can navigate the world. But the second half, he said, is for reclamation. It is the journey home to the soul. And this journey home can be painful. Because at 60, the soul is done with politeness. It refuses to wear the masks that helped you survive. It pushes away obligations that feel hollow. It demands a radical honesty. And that honesty sometimes reveals a difficult truth, that much of what you built was a fortress, not a home. That's why, around this age, many people report a strange sensation of detachment. The life they fought so hard for can suddenly feel like an elaborate set for a play whose script no longer makes sense. And despite all the markers of success, there's a profound weariness. It's not physical exhaustion, it's soul fatigue. It's not depression, it is a moment of piercing clarity. It's the soul whispering, enough, stop building outwards. It's time to furnish the inside. In this new season, you begin to re-evaluate everything. The career, the marriage, the friendships, the old compromises and the silent sacrifices. All of it comes up for review, not to torment you, but to be understood. At 60, the soul's hunger changes. It doesn't want another promotion, a faster car, or a younger face in the mirror. It craves stillness. It craves peace. It craves the raw, simple assurance that there is still meaning, that beauty remains, and that something sacred within you has waited patiently all this time. It is a period of deep emotional decluttering, a time to clear out the inherited anxieties, to release the grudges against those who did their best but fell short, to finally let go of the relentless pressure to be a rock for everyone else. It's about looking in the mirror and finally meeting the person who has been there all along, without the roles, the titles, and the expectations. Those who embrace this passage with open eyes find something extraordinary. They find that the soul has no expiration date. It simply returns to its original essence. And what felt like the final chapter turns out to be the preface to an entirely new book. One lived with more depth, more grace, and more truth. This is the great secret that culture rarely discusses. The inner turning point no one prepares you for. But for those who learn to listen to their own inner whisper, it becomes the path that finally leads them home. Some may call it wisdom, others may call it getting older, but it's a process beyond words. At 60, the body might start moving to a slower tempo, but deep within the soul, a new momentum builds, as if every postponed part of you is finally saying, "It's my turn now." The paradox is that this transformation is almost completely invisible. There's no external trigger. You just wake up one morning, and the ambition that drove you for 40 years has evaporated. You find yourself in conversations that once felt important, and now they just feel like noise. The achievements you paraded so proudly now seem like heavy medals, weighing you down. The soul has begun to ask a new set of questions. What truly nourishes me? What part of myself have I never given a voice? If I had nothing to prove, who would I be? These are not random musings. They are the seeds of your next life sprouting. Because at 60, the measure of time shifts from quantity to quality. The sense of urgency is no longer driven by external clocks, but by an internal calling. Carl Jung posited that after the ego-building phase of life, the psyche's primary drive is toward wholeness, and that can only be achieved by re-engaging with what we've disowned. The shadow, as he called it, steps out from the wings and asks for a role on the stage. And the shadow isn't evil. It's simply everything you had to cut away from yourself to be accepted, to be safe, to succeed. The silenced artist. The passionate heart you were told was too much. The deep-seated intuition you learned to ignore. The wounded parts of you that were never given space to heal. At 60, all of these exiled pieces start to return, not as burdens, but as gifts. It's why it is so common at this stage to see people make radical life changes. They go back to school. They leave relationships that have long expired. They pick up a paintbrush for the first time in 50 years. Why now? Because the soul doesn't operate on a human schedule. It follows a sacred timing. When it senses that despite the battles, despite the scars, there is still time, it will demand to live the rest of that time authentically. It will no longer perform. This is why you see so many women, in particular, come into a new kind of power at this age. They stop making themselves smaller. They stop apologizing for their presence. They stop asking for permission to take up space. The kind of beauty that blossoms at 60 is not about aesthetics. It is the beauty of liberation, of integrity, of having finally become oneself. It is a beauty that can be unsettling to those still invested in surface appearances, because it is too real, too quiet, too unapologetic. And those who embody it have lost the need to justify anything. Maybe you've felt this shift stirring within you, a feeling that you've outgrown your old life, a quiet but persistent pull to go deeper, to spend your energy on what has real substance, to say no without apology and to say yes from the very core of your being. This impulse is not selfish, it is sacred. It's the soul's awakening, the beginning of a chapter where your life is no longer a performance for an audience, but an authentic expression from your center. And those who find the courage for this turn discover a rare kind of treasure, the peace that comes from being utterly, completely yourself, without apology or defense, because the soul is finally breathing its own air, in its own time. There's a silent confession many people feel as they reach this life stage, even if they never say it out loud. I have spent most of my life living for someone else. For my partner, my kids, my parents, my boss, for social expectations. All of it occupied so much internal real estate that now, when the demands quiet down, there's an echoing emptiness, an unlived life within. It is precisely in this quiet space that the soul begins to speak. It no longer wants to be useful, it wants to be true. In a culture that worships productivity, that impulse can seem lazy or self-indulgent. But the soul's agenda is not productivity. It is wholeness. And at 60, its message becomes clear. I've followed the world's rules. Now, it's time to follow mine. This inversion of priorities can be terrifying. Nobody hands you a manual for this. Society still portrays aging as a steady decline. But for Jung, it was the exact opposite. This stage of life held the greatest potential because it's when the tyranny of the ego begins to wane. Pride softens, and time itself begins to teach you what was important all along. It's no coincidence that at this point, old memories often resurface with a vivid intensity. Moments from childhood, forgotten friendships, feelings you thought were long buried. This is not mere nostalgia. This is the soul conducting an inventory. It's reviewing your life story to understand what still needs healing, what questions remain, and what wisdom has been gained. And to do this, it requires silence. The soul at this stage doesn't shout, it hints. It speaks in the language of dreams, of sudden emotions that wash over you for no apparent reason, of a strange ache for something you can't name. You start to notice that some relationships no longer feel resonant, that some debates no longer matter, that some of your deepest wounds have finally turned into scars that no longer define you. It is the soul asserting its authority, quietly declaring, "I'm in charge now." But for this to become your reality, you have to be willing to listen. To listen to the sudden sadness that visits you, to the body when it asks for stillness, to the profound boredom that settles in during activities that once excited you. All these are signals of a deep, structural shift taking place within. And this isn't just a redecoration, it is a demolition of the old self. It dismantles facades, retires outdated roles, and brings you face to face with the one thing you may have spent a lifetime avoiding: your own unfiltered truth. At this juncture, many finally find what they might call spirituality, not as a rigid belief system, but as a direct, lived experience of connection, a profound state of awareness. Jung's famous statement that we are not enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious, takes on a whole new power at 60. Because at this stage, the darkness is no longer an enemy to be vanquished. It is a portal. It is the fertile void from which your next self will grow. What once felt like crushing loneliness starts to feel like a sacred solitude. A chance to meet the essential self that was always there, waiting for you to come home. It is remarkable how at 60, even the definitions of words begin to change. Time, for example, is no longer a thief. It becomes an ally. It means presence. You cease to measure your life by achievements and start to experience it by moments, by the integrity of a single conversation, the stillness between two thoughts. Love, too, is transformed. It ceases to be a contract of needs and expectations and becomes an act of conscious companionship. You no longer love someone to fix your own emptiness. You love them to share your fullness. Love no longer requires grand gestures. It thrives in shared silence, in a look of deep understanding, in the quiet honor of another's journey. And fear, which once dictated so many choices, loses its power. You've weathered too many storms to be terrified by a little rain. You failed and survived enough times to know that fear is just a sensation, not a stop sign. At 60, a wisdom emerges that cannot be taught, a clarity born not of intellect, but of lived experience. It is a knowing that settles in your bones, speaks through your gaze, and calms the room without saying a word. And it is precisely this quality that can make others uncomfortable. It rattles those still performing in the theater of the ego. Those who believe worth is measured by visibility and power is synonymous with youth. They don't understand that a soul that has ripened becomes a source of deep creativity, because it's at this stage that the truly beautiful things can finally come through. The stories that heal, the advice that guides, the silences that hold. But only that which has been allowed to die can be reborn. At 60, many things have to die: the desire to be liked, the myth of control, the addiction to saving others, the crushing burden of perfectionism. And as those things fall away, something magical occurs. You begin to breathe. As if after a lifetime of holding your breath, the soul finally exhales. And from this place of inner spaciousness, the world looks different. It is more vibrant, more precious, more real. That's why so many people at this point feel an irresistible urge to create, to journal, to walk in nature, to take a class, to travel not just to see new sights, but to meet a new self in a new place. The soul is yearning for expression. It wants out of the box. It wants to be seen, not for validation from others, but for the simple joy of its own existence. And every single step taken on this path is a form of homecoming. It's a healing that has nothing to do with medicine and everything to do with finally being at peace with your own timing. You're no longer trying to recapture the past or control the future. You are simply arriving fully in the present. And that is the ultimate wisdom, to inhabit your own life with all that you are, without hiding, without excuses for how long it took you, and without needing anyone's permission to begin. There is a season of the soul that can only bloom past 60. It's not the frantic, loud spring of youth. It is a quieter, more resilient autumn, one whose colors are made rich by the memory of all the seasons that came before it. And when it blooms with the gravity of truth. This season operates by a different clock. It makes fewer demands on the body, but it asks everything of the soul. It asks you to go back and examine the quiet contracts you made with your life, the unspoken agreements, the painful compromises, the promises you whispered to your younger self. It's a time of deep reconciliation with your own story. But now, there is no judgment. There is only compassion. You stop judging your past self for the mistakes. You see that you did the best you could with the tools you had. This act of self-forgiveness is profoundly liberating, because only those who have forgiven themselves can walk without carrying the weight of their own past. And lightness is the ultimate goal at 60. Not a superficial lightness that denies pain, but a deep lightness that can hold sorrow without being defined by it, that can feel loss without being shattered by it, that can live with uncertainty without being paralyzed by it. Jung called this a late individuation, a second birth. It's as if the soul, after spending decades conforming to the world, finally declares, "No, I want to become myself." And this process of becoming is the quietest, most profound adventure of all. It doesn't need applause. It needs no witnesses. It's simply a return. At 60, this return is felt in the smallest of moments, in a walk with no purpose, in a piece of music that opens your heart, in an old photograph that reminds you of who you used to be, in watching a sunset and feeling, for the first time, like you are a part of it. The soul becomes deeply moved by simple things, not because it has grown weaker, but because it has finally lowered its defenses. It is no longer armored against the world. It is open to feeling. This sensitivity is not a liability. It is a refined power. It is the harvest of a life fully lived. And at the same time, it is the portal to a rare form of influence, the kind that does not seek to preach, but to embody. At 60, you no longer feel the need to win arguments. You simply live your truth with quiet dignity. And that presence becomes a permission slip for others. Your family, your friends, and even strangers are touched by it. Because when a soul becomes integrated, it radiates a quiet light that illuminates everything around it. There is a type of beauty that is only born when the performance ends. You see it in the lines around the eyes, in the gentle rhythm of speech, in the gaze that has witnessed so much yet retains its capacity for wonder. It is a beauty stripped of all artifice. And for this reason, it is the most powerful kind of all. This beauty doesn't ask for attention. It commands respect. And those who carry it are often unaware of it, because for a lifetime they measured themselves against a standard that was never meant for them. But at 60, this beauty demands to be seen. It appears when you make peace with time, when you stop looking for your reflection in other people's approval, when you finally understand that your story, with all its broken pieces, is a masterpiece. This beauty lives in the person who can be alone without feeling lonely, in the one who can feel deep sorrow without breaking, in the voice that can hold a silence without feeling awkward, in choices that require no justification. At this point, the soul develops its own grammar, and its language is presence. You finally understand the difference between hearing and truly listening, between knowing and truly feeling. Relationships begin to realign organically. You gently move away from people and situations that deplete you and gravitate toward those that nourish your soul. And in the moments when you are alone, you realize that you have finally learned to be good company for yourself. That is the ultimate freedom, when solitude is no longer a void, but a sanctuary, when silence is no longer a threat, but a source of wisdom, when time is no longer a commodity to be managed, but a space to be inhabited, space to feel, to heal, to become, to exist. At 60, you realize you don't owe anyone an explanation, you just are. And those who are meant to be with you will see you. Those who are not will fall away, and this no longer causes you pain, because you understand that a true soul can only be seen by another soul that has also awakened. And in that silent, mutual recognition lies the only connection that matters. A connection that doesn't grasp, demand, or possess. A connection that honors, like two mirrors reflecting the same light, like the quiet knowledge that despite it all, a life of profound meaning is not only possible, it is happening. When this inner shift begins, everything that was suppressed starts to rise. Sometimes as a gentle knowing, other times as an earthquake that shakes your foundations. But it always arrives with a singular invitation. Finally, be who you were meant to be. And that requires a great letting go. Letting go of who you were supposed to be, of the narratives others wrote for you, of the need to be productive, essential, right, and perfect. At 60, the focus shifts from what you are doing to how you are being while you do it. It's the quality of presence you bring to the act. It's the soul that animates the gesture. You start to see that your deepest wisdom did not come from your successes, but from your pain, from the choices you made when you were at your lowest, from the times you honored your truth even when your voice shook, from the boundaries you finally drew after a lifetime of saying, yes, this inner library of experience is your real wealth now. It doesn't appear on a resume, but it shows in the way you navigate your day, in the way you love, in the way you forgive. As the soul comes into its power, it learns to trust its own guidance system. It reads the subtle signs from the body. It honors its own energy cycles. It knows when the moment calls for a roar and when it calls for a respectful silence. That isn't indecision. It is wisdom. It is what is left when all the external scaffolding is gone. It is the core of you. Jung was clear. The second half of life is not a decline. It is an ascent toward integration. It's the period when all your disparate parts are invited to the table. The part of you that is fierce and the part that is tender. The part that is wounded and the part that is wise. All of these selves meet, and in their meeting, a new kind of strength is forged. Not the strength to dominate, but the strength to endure, to hold, to witness. A strength that requires no external validation, because its source is internal. This is the strength that walks with you through the rest of your years. It asks for very little, only your honesty, your attention, and the courage to never, ever abandon yourself again. There is a moment when it all clicks, not because your problems disappear, but because something inside you has settled. At 60, the soul no longer runs. It walks. It no longer craves answers. It is content to live in the questions. It no longer needs to change the world. It wants only to be at peace in its own skin. At this point, you see that the whole point was never about getting somewhere. It was about being somewhere. Being fully here. Being stubbornly, gloriously, unapologetically you, even if the world never quite understood. Staying loyal to your own evolution, even when it was painful. Being whole, even with all the broken pieces. By 60, life has shown you its beauty and its brutality. The dreams have been tested. The shortcuts have led to cliffs. And yet, there is still something inside you that gets up, that hopes, that wants to live. Not because it has to, but because it gets to. This impulse is the ultimate sign of life. Carl Jung saw this period as sacred, because it is when the ego finally learns to serve the soul. When the noise of the world recedes, and the inner landscape becomes your sanctuary. When you learn that you do not have to carry the world. When you finally give yourself permission to rest. And this resting is not resignation. It is a profound act of reconciliation with your journey, with your body, with your own beautiful, imperfect life. And in that quiet space, the true purpose of it all begins to dawn on you. Not the one you were taught, but the one you have earned. If you have stayed with this until the end, maybe you feel that gentle call. Maybe you see yourself in this description, recognizing parts of you that have been waiting. If something here touched a chord, I invite you to leave a sentence in the comments that captures this new chapter for you. A quiet declaration, an inner commitment. If you feel this message could resonate with someone you know navigating this turn, please share it. And if you wish to continue on this journey with us, in a space that honors the soul's timing, subscribe and turn on your notifications. Because here, we believe every story deserves a voice, and every season a chance to bloom.